So thanks everyone for joining our media training for Polar Early Career Scientists event today, hosted by the Polar Science Early Career Community Office, or PSECCO, in conjunction with the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences, or CIRES, at the University of Colorado Boulder. We are going to kick off the event with a few introductions, and then we'll hear soon from our speaker. So I'm Mariama Dryak Valleys. I'm the director for PSECCO, and I'm joined today by Madison Payne, who is the PSECCO event coordinator. You've likely seen some emails from her in your inbox. Madison is also going to be doing tech support today, and so if you run into any bumps along the way, give her a direct message and she'll be able to help you out. We're also joined by Lauren Lipuma. This event will be led by Lauren. Lauren is CIRES' scientific communications editor, and we'll hear more about Lauren's background here in a little bit. At the core of PSECCO is building welcoming environments for everyone. So as with each event, we wanted to set expectations that we expect all attendees to adhere to PSECCO's community guidelines when interfacing with others on the call. Madison has posted a link to those community guidelines in the chat if you're not familiar with them, but the basic outline is be respectful to one another. Many of us here do polar science in locations across the United States and beyond, with research focused on both poles and in high alpine regions across the world. And we want to acknowledge that much of that science takes place on the unceded traditional territories and ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples, and that some of the research done in these locations has historical roots in colonialism. With this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to our understanding of the polar regions and recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have and continue to develop in relationship to their lands. With that, I am going to pass it over to Madison to give us an overview of what to expect today.
Thank you. Yeah, so today you'll be hearing from Lauren Lipuma, the CIRES Scientific Communications Editor. Lauren will discuss a little bit about how news cycles work, what to expect before, during, and after an interview, how to hone your science message for maximum effectiveness. And then following that introduction from Lauren, you'll have the opportunity to engage in a couple of fun activities. And then if we have some time at the end, we'll be doing a short Q&A session, time dependent. Right. And then a little bit about Lauren before we get started. So like I said, Lauren is a member of the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences communications team at the University of Colorado Boulder. She has a background in engineering, but she has been a science communicator for over 10 years, mostly focusing on writing, editing, graphic design, video production. And she has lots of experience getting science results placed in local, national, and international media outlets, and has trained dozens of scientists on how to communicate their work. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it along to Lauren.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madison and Mariama, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. They've already introduced me, so I don't need to give you too much more, but I'm Lauren. I work at CIRES. CIRES is the largest research institute at CU Boulder, and we focus on environmental and earth science systems research. So, like they said, I have a lot of experience in covering science news and getting science placed in the news. I worked in the American Geophysical Union press office for many years, so I have a lot of experience of searching through meeting abstracts and new papers, looking for interesting science to highlight to the press and the public. So I'm really excited to share my experience with you all today and give you some tips on how to work with the media. And like Madison said, we'll have Q&A at the end, but if anyone has any questions during the presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat, and I'll try to get to them. So my agenda for today, so first we'll just go over some goals and get some introductions done and get a sense of how familiar everyone is with working with reporters. I'll go over kind of what makes science newsworthy, when science projects make it into the news, how the news cycle works, And then I'll talk about how to prepare for what to do before the interview if you're working with reporters, what to do during the interview, what happens afterwards, and then we'll do a fun activity to close everything out. And then I'll give you some resources and more info, and we'll open it up for questions. So my goal for all of you today is just to get you all more comfortable with doing media interviews and to familiarize you all with the process. So you can ignore that poll EV link right there, that it's not working, but what I just want to ask you guys, first of all, you can throw your answers in the chat. Just say yes or no if you have worked with the media before, if you've done media interviews. You can just go throw your answers right in there. It looks kind of like we're pretty evenly split, like some of you have, some of you haven't. And so now think about, are there what words or phrases would describe the experiences that you've had? If you've worked with the media, like throw any words or phrases in there that you feel describe how your experience went. Good, bad, weird, fun, intimidating, frustrating, stressful. Okay, yeah. Overwhelming, yeah, it can be. Challenging. Yeah, fast-paced. Well, I'm hoping by the end of this it will feel less overwhelming and challenging for you all. I hope that it eventually becomes fun for you guys. Oh, great. Awesome. And are there any specific questions you have now about working with the media, whether you've done your interviews or not? Like anything you would ask me, like, how do I handle this? How do I do this? So I want to know, what questions you have so I can make sure that I address them. And if you have no questions, that's fine too. And one more thing, are there any questions from reporters that you're anxious about answering or that you're like afraid of getting? Can we ask for questions in advance? Yeah, I can get to that. Climate change. Podcast formats, yeah, we can talk about that. Yes, all right. Anything political? Yep. What are they looking for? Okay, awesome. These are great questions. I think I'll probably be addressing all of them in the presentation, but if I don't, you still have these questions at the end, just remind me and I will answer them. All right, so some of you guys have done interviews, some of you haven't. I'm hoping that after today you'll feel a little bit more comfortable and hopefully you won't be too overwhelmed or intimidated by the process. Yeah, climate change, become political, I'll talk about that for sure. So first we're talk about, when does science actually make it in the news? When do projects or papers get news coverage? So if we start off and just look general, the whole landscape of news, what makes something newsworthy, an event or whatever it is? Well, obviously it has to be new, it has to be timely. So it needs to be maybe significant in some way. Often it's local, especially for a local news outlet. It might have an effect on the local community, the local city, state, whatever it might be. Sometimes it's just things that are odd or unusual. Usually or almost always has a human interest element, has to affect people, has to affect us in some way for us to care about it. And superlatives are often something that makes it into news. So like the first, best, the oldest, the longest, new records, things like that. So if we were to kind of take this criteria and apply it to science, what would make a science result newsy? Well, again, it has to be new. So things like discoveries often make it into the news. Things that are unusual, counterintuitive, or something that maybe goes against the current consensus or challenges the current understanding of what we have about a field or a topic. Something that significantly advances the field. Maybe it relates to a current event, a landmark, some historical event, perhaps. Obviously, if something impacts our daily lives, that will definitely make it newsy. Maybe it changes our understanding of the universe or the world we live in. Anything that appeals to the senses, a cool sight, a sound, a taste, a smell. Those things can often be very newsy. Establishing a new record, again, superlatives, the oldest something, the longest. Or sometimes it's just fun or weird or odd or silly. That's okay too. That sometimes can be a really good news hook for science. And I just want to remind you all, like, these are not hard and fast rules. This is just kind of guidelines, just like the Pirates Code. It's just like not every single discovery is going to be newsy, not every advancement, but this is just kind of something to guide you along when you're working on your projects. Another way to think about it is, how would someone react emotionally to this result? Would they have a reaction? So sometimes you can think about it as categorizing it as, would they have a reaction of awe, amusement, or anxiety/anger? So if we think about awe, that's like something that piques your curiosity, like a gee whiz type of story, or maybe a mystery has been solved, or there's a new record, or something that's weird or odd, or maybe it's amusing in some way. It has a humorous element, or it appeals to the senses. Or maybe it does instill a little bit of anxiety, like it has a negative impact on our lives. Maybe there's some controversy, some political aspects to it, or maybe there's an unsolved mystery. So both solved mysteries and unsolved mysteries can be newsy in both ways. And so now if we think about the other side of that, when are results usually not newsy or not making it to the news? Incremental advances often, and to be honest, like that's most of science, right? Most of science is incremental. And that is totally okay. Most of the time, science isn't going to make it into the news. And that's the same for every single topic. Not every crime makes it into the news. In fact, most of them don't. Most things that, not everything that Congress does will make it into the news, not every political decision. It's just the most significant or impactful ones. So that's okay. It's not a judgment on anyone's science or anyone's projects. It's just, the way it is. Things have to reach a certain threshold to be of interest to a general audience. So just keep that in mind. Reporters often like to focus on observational results rather than modeling results. But again, that's not always true. So, modeling results usually aren't super newsy. If you're just improving a model or a technique, that often isn't going to make it into the news either, unless the technique is really cool or interesting in some way. If you're confirming what is already known, or summarizing the latest in the field, like writing a review paper, usually that's not going to be newsy, or if it's already been reported by other media outlets, or if you have kind of like what we call a non-story, where there's no correlation between the variables, where you're looking if something causes this or something leads to this, and the answer is no, often that's not going to make it into the news. So let's say you're working on a project or writing a paper, or maybe you're giving a presentation at an upcoming meeting, and you think your results might be of interest to the wider community, to the general public. What do you do? Well, first, if you're at CU or CIRES, where I work, you can contact us directly. Where all the rest of you just work with your institution's communications office. They might be called comms, they might be called press, public information, whatever it is, work with them. And I'll give you some examples, or I'll tell you why in a little bit, but they really help you. They might help you write a press release. We might write a news story about it. We might promote it on social media. Maybe we'll do some multimedia work, like put together a video or a graphic for the public about your work. And they really will help you. Your work with them will really help you get your science placed in news outlets. This helps you control the narrative, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a moment. So first thing to do, contact your press office, trust me, you are never bugging us. We always want to hear about the interesting stuff you're doing. So just come talk to your press office, let them know, and they'll work with you. But the important thing to remember is, tell us before your paper is published, before your presentation, before the thing actually happens. So reporters like to cover new studies. So when studies are first coming out, that's usually when they get the most coverage. So we want to know ahead of time, so we have time to prepare a news story or a multimedia piece to highlight your work. So give us as much time as you can. Tell us maybe when you submit your paper or when you're preparing your paper for submission. Those are good times to reach out. You can also let your comms office know if you're interested in being an on-call expert. So if there's something going on in the news, like a severe storm or something else that's happening, and reporters are looking for other experts to weigh in on this, we like to have those on hand. Reporters will often contact the press offices for that. So if you're interested in that, go talk to your press office. Oh, Mariam, a great question. What happens if your new science has unfortunate timing with other events that might take more attention? This happens very often. Like I said, the threshold for what makes it in the news actually changes. It depends on what else is happening in the world. So when COVID happened, the very beginning of COVID in March and spring of 2020, almost all science news or almost all science dropped out of the news unless it was related to COVID. And so the threshold for what made it in the news got way higher. It had to be huge and significant if it was going to compete with all that COVID news. So, and that's okay, and that happens. So if your science has unfortunate timing, sometimes we can change that a little bit. Maybe we'll wait a little. Often we can work with journal publishers and see if they can hold a paper for a period of time to kind of wait for that other more newsy event to pass. And so that way your science might get more coverage. So this does happen. Actually, at the American Geophysical Union meeting just last month in New Orleans, we had a press release that some of our CU Boulder scientists were involved in a report on the Hunga Tonga eruption from 2022. But that got completely overshadowed by the news that the administration wanted to dismantle NCAR, or the National Center for Atmospheric Research, for those who aren't familiar. So that was a classic example of that. And at the time, for this particular example, we couldn't adjust the timing, and it was just a sad fact. But sometimes we can. So just work with your press office and see what you can do. So I want to show you guys an example of something that was really challenging. So what reporters do is they are on press lists for institutions and universities and for journals as well. So they get notices when new papers are coming out that are interesting that they might want to cover. But they also just kind of comb through journals and meeting abstracts themselves looking for interesting science. So sometimes it's really challenging for a reporter or a press officer like me to look at a paper and figure out what's going on, what the result is, and whether or not it's newsworthy. So this is an example of a study that came out last August, and I'll put the link in the chat here. Oh, Madison, you got it. Thank you. So this is a paper that came out in August about this interesting supernova that happened. Now, I just want you guys to take a quick look at the title and the abstract. It's super jargony. It's really hard to tell what it's even about or what the result is and what's going on and whether or not it's newsworthy. You can see there's a lot of technical terms in here. The only clue that I could really pick out here was this one sentence from the abstract that says, we find this brightening optical precursor, blah, 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 is consistent with a massive and partially stripped helium star undergoing an instability-induced merger with a black hole companion. So this sounds kind of interesting, but I have no idea if this is weird, if this is unusual, if this happens all the time. No idea. Just from what they wrote in the paper. Turns out it is actually really newsy, and this was a very unusual, strange supernova that these astronomers discovered. So this institution's press office put out a press release. This is a screenshot of their headline, and you can read that if you want. Madison put the link in the chat. So it actually is a new type of supernova, and it was super weird. And what actually happened was there's this massive helium star that exploded when it tried to swallow a black hole. Basically, the star got so massive, it got too close to this little black hole, tried to swallow the black hole, but the black hole instead ripped the star apart and caused this crazy supernova. You would never have known that from looking at that paper. So here's a quote from the lead author in the press release. This blast was sparked by this catastrophic encounter with this black hole. It's the strongest evidence that these interactions can detonate a star. So this was something super unusual, maybe hadn't been seen before. It was super strange, but it was so hard to pick that out from the paper itself. So, if you want to throw in the chat, what do you think the authors could have done better? How could they have made it more obvious what is going on here? If you have any thoughts, you can throw them in the chat right there. No, there was not a plain language summary. So that is a good point. And some journals require them, some don't. So a plain language summary would have been a great way to do this. My recommendation would for them have to been, yeah, exactly, make the title more accessible, make the abstract a little bit more accessible, just use some keywords to show that this was a strange, unusual event. Right, with the word new, exactly. Great job. Awesome. So this was like, a super fun story. It actually did get covered in the news. So here are some actual headlines that were written about this. And you may have seen these. These came out in August of last year. My favorite is this Gizmodo one. The star tried to swallow the black hole. So you can see that like sometimes the newsiness of a study isn't apparent. So it really helps you to work with your press office to really help them understand what's interesting and new about your study. Okay, so now let's say you've got a project or a paper coming out and it's newsy and maybe you're going to be doing some interviews, or maybe just a reporter calls you out of the blue and wants to talk about your work. How should you prepare and develop your talking points? So first, some logistics. Whenever you're working with reporters, let your communications team know what's going on. They like just to be aware of it. They keep track of all these things, and they want to help highlight your work and how it's getting in the news. So just let them know. If the reporter calls you or emails you and you need some time to prepare your talking points or to get back to them, that's totally okay. Just let them know. Try to respect their deadline as much as they can. I always ask for a reporter when they email me, what's your deadline? And if you know you can't meet their deadline, let them know and maybe recommend a colleague or someone else they could talk to. So you can take your time, but just respect their deadline. And the best thing you can do, what we're mostly going to focus on here, is preparing your talking points in advance. Now think about, kind of what can and can't you talk about. You are welcome, and this is pretty much universal. You can talk as much about your science to your heart's desire. Talk about your science. You can talk about your topic or your field in general as much as you want. You could talk about if there's a problem or an issue that's coming up, you could talk about potential solutions, options, potential policies that could address or action steps that could be taken to address that problem. Totally fine. You could talk about how political action or things that are affecting you personally or your work specifically. But the things you want to avoid are kind of speaking on behalf of the university or your institution. So talking about your university's business, like personnel, funding, finances, or how a political decision might affect the university or the institute as a whole. You want to avoid that. These questions are better placed to a university spokesperson. So if you get those questions, refer the reporter to your press office. And they will handle it from there. So just try to remember, just kind of focus on yourself, your work, your topic, the science, and leave those other questions, the bigger questions about the university, to the spokesperson themselves. So first thing you want to do is prepare your talking points in advance. And what this is basically just distilling down your work for a general audience. You're going to pull out the most important information that a general audience would want to know or need to know. Why do you want to do this ahead of time? First of all, it makes it easier on you. It helps you be more clear, more consistent in all your answers, especially if you're doing multiple interviews. Helps you be really concise as well, get your point across quickly and accurately and succinctly. It gives you more control over how the research is portrayed. Very often, reporters they might be working on tight deadlines, they're working on many stories. There's always a chance that they might misinterpret something or misunderstand. Or sometimes, the research gets portrayed in a way that isn't quite accurate. You have more control over it the more you prepare and the more your message is clear. So this helps you minimize ambiguity, helps minimize misunderstandings, and it helps to ensure that the reporter retains your key messages that you want to get across. They're not going to remember every single thing that you say, or they're not going to highlight everything that you say. You really want them to focus on your key messages. So this really helps you figure out what that is and make sure the reporter drives it home. So my 3 principles for preparing your talking points are to remember the gist, to break your message down into discrete chunks, and to make it meaningful. So I'll go through what all of that means. So first is to remember the gist. And so first we have to think about how academic style is different from news writing style. So when you're writing a paper or presenting at a conference, you often follow this kind of chronological order. You start with your intro and your background, previous research, then you go into the methods of your current study, what you did, and then you get into your results, discussion, conclusion, what you found, what it means, what the impact is, right? Nothing wrong with this, makes perfect sense. News stories are actually written in the opposite order, where they start with the lead and the headline, which captures the results, the implications. It's basically what you found and why we should care. Those are the things that a reporter is always going to include in a story, because that is the only reason they're writing it, because it's important. We want to know what you found and why you care. And then after that, it gets to the body, the who, what, when, where, why. And then finally, the tail is kind of like the extra details, maybe what's next. It's things that aren't super critical to understanding of the story, but they're there. Oh, sorry, Carla. By gist, I mean like the summary, the main point. What's the take home kind of, right? So there's a couple of reasons news stories are written like this. Mostly it's to capture people's attention in the very beginning. The point of a news story is that the reader knows the outcome and how it affects them right away at the outset. So you don't need to structure your answers in this way, but I just want you to remember that the summary, the gist is really important for the reporter's audience. So you could try this kind of structure I call the hourglass, where you start with the gist, the summary, and then you go into your normal academic style. That's totally fine. So just keep that in mind. Always keep in mind that big picture, the top level, high level overview of your work. So this is an example from Nora Ephron. Nora Ephron is a film director, and she was also a journalist for many years. So when she was going through journalism school and had to practice summarizing news events and things that she was writing about, this is an example that she gave. So this is a little summary of something. You can read it. It's about high school. What do you all think? You can put this in the chat. What is the gist? What is the summary? If you were working at this high school, what would you tell the parents of students at the school based on what is written here? Let's see if we can pick it out. It's not always easy. Oh, Lena, you nailed it. No school next Thursday. Yeah, faculty train in new methods. Think about, what would you tell the parents? The message for the parents is basically that there's no school next Thursday. Right? All these other details, they're interesting, but they're not super important to understand what is actually happening. School closed next Thursday. You got it. Great job, guys. Okay, so you think about it, you kind of summarize it, picked out the gist. You want to break your message down into discrete chunks. So this is just my way of structuring your talking points. There are other ways, you can explore them. This is just what I find works. So the things you want to include are the news, the impact, the context, and the human dimension. So the news is the results. What did you find? Also kind of like the who, what, when, where, why of your study, what you did, when, and where. The impact, which is why do we care? Why is this result interesting or significant? And then remember the context. Is this result special? Does it relate? How does it relate to previous studies? Is it different in some way? And then the human dimension. How does it affect people? So I recommend structuring your talking points into these 4 areas. So what we know, which is the background, what came before, what is new, which is your news, what you did and what you found, and then why it matters, the impact, the context, the human dimension, and then finally your take-home message, which is your gist or your summary. So what does all of that mean? And I'll show you an example of this in just a minute. And the third part I say is make it meaningful. And what I mean by that is focus on the meaning of what you're saying rather than the detail. Think of a good example I like to use to think about when you're buying something like a computer or a camera. Think about when you go to the website of the product, you have the product overview section and then you have the technical specifications. Focus on the product overview. So here's an example. I like photography. So let's say I were buying a new digital camera. I'd go to this camera's website and I see, okay, what is the overview? Okay, they're calling it a super hybrid. It's a performance all-arounder who work in photo and video. It gives you an overview of its capabilities, right? This is useful information for me when I'm buying a camera. Up here on the right are all these key features, the tech specs. Those are kind of unnecessary details, at least in the beginning. So like you don't need to go into all this detail. So in the science world, this might be like the specific details of the model or the instrument that you used, who did what on your research team. These details aren't really important for a general audience. You really want to stick to the overview, what is important for someone who's not an expert in the field. Use those keywords like I mentioned earlier. If something is unusual or weird or surprising in some way, say that. Make sure, use those to help demonstrate the importance of it. And again, provide that context. Like what does this result mean? Is it special? Is it unusual from what we found in the past? And also show why we should care. This is really important. Emphasize the value of your work, how you're improving our lives, how you're helping society. Try to inject some positivity or end on a positive note when you can. As we all know, many times with climate science, it can be very doom and gloom. It can be very depressing. So when you can, try to show that the science is part of a solution or that there are opportunities for action. When people hear just kind of doom and gloom, depressing news, they kind of shut down emotionally and they think, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about it, so why do I care? But if you show that there are opportunities for action or that there are solutions and things we can do, then they stay open and receptive to your message. So try to think about that. Use examples that are really relevant to people's lives. So, if your study was about glaciers melting and that leading to sea level rise, and you're being interviewed by a news outlet, let's say in Miami, you want to talk about how sea level rise would affect the city of Miami. So try to keep it really relevant to the audience. And then you can try to connect your work to things that people already care about. So what do in general people care about? We care about our lives, we care about our future, our children's future, our community, maybe important landmarks, things that make, our identity as a community or a country or a state, whatever it may be. Clean water, clean air, space to live and breathe. So think about those things and how your work connects to it. It's really obvious for you as the scientist, but to someone who's not an expert, it's not so obvious, and you have to really drive it home. So show how your work connects to those things, and people will already care. So here's a couple examples of things you could say, like, this research is really important because, or we have the opportunity to safeguard our resources, or safeguard this for our next future generations. People can use our information or use our results to advocate for themselves. We're giving them actionable information. Our work is improving these forecasts that protects lives and property. So think about that and how you can use that in your work. Other tips for success, just remember who your audience is. Most often, so there are some science outlets for the science-interested public, people who are a little bit more science literate, but most news outlets are just for a general audience. And if you think about it, most adults, at least in the United States, they have not taken a science class since high school. Maybe some in college, but mostly high school. So it's not that they can't understand your work, it's that they just need a little bit of a refresher, more context about why it's important and meaningful. And try to use plain language as much as you can. Try to not introduce too much jargon, too many technical terms. You can, if you have to, you can introduce a new term and define it, but if you use too many terms, people are just going to lose the whole thread of what you're saying. So try to use plain language as much as you can. And don't be afraid to make it fun. You can totally add in your personality. Be yourself. It's really just a conversation with another person. Try to use metaphors or stories or social math, which is where you compare a number that's large or small to something that we already understand, that's more digestible. So you can also try to craft some sound bites. And these are those quotes that are really poignant and interesting that make it into the news story that really just demonstrate what's going on. So here's two that are related to polar science. So this first one about Thwaites. These are both from researchers at CIRES. This one guy said, Thwaites Glacier is really holding on by its fingernails. So we have to keep watching it to see what's going to happen. It's a very evocative image. Or 10 years ago, the Arctic was whispering in terms of climate change. Now it's screaming, like climate change effects are really, really big and impactful. And this takes a lot of time and practice, so don't worry Do you feel like you're not good at it yet? Sorry, my dog's barking a little bit. You can hear that. And if you're still not sure where to start, if you need some more help, think about asking yourself these questions. What are the 1 to 3 things you want the reporter to take away from the interview? How do your results compare to what's already been found? What did you do here in your new study that has not been done before? Why is it new and different? How does your work benefit society at large? What compelling numbers or examples are there to emphasize that? Do you have any examples or anecdotes or stories to explain your work? And do you have a request to make of the audience? What opportunities for action are there? All right, so after you've prepared your talking points, you've kind of written everything down, you know what you want to say, it's really important to practice because when you write something down and then you read it aloud, it often sounds different or you might kind of stumble over your words a little bit. So it's really important to practice. Speak them aloud multiple times. Role play with a friend or a colleague. Have a friend or colleague ask you questions or just explain your work to them and see what they understand. What questions do they have? Is there anything that you think might be contentious or maybe controversial? You may not be able to anticipate that, and that's fine. That happens all the time. But if you can anticipate that, think about it. And then practice kind of pivoting back to your main messages if the conversation gets off topic. And I'll show you some examples of how to do that in just a minute. Try to avoid getting bogged down in the weeds and the fine details. Stick to a high level and let the reporter ask those questions. Let them ask those further details that they want. And try incorporating these into your paper writing. Like I said before, try to maybe write a plain language abstract, use them in your paper title or your abstract. So to help people who are reading science understand what the importance is. So here's a recent example from a study that came out at CIRES just a few months ago in November. So this first headline here, this is this headline of the CIRES news story that we wrote about this particular study. So this was a study about Hectoria Glacier in Antarctica. So the researchers had found that this glacier retreated faster than any other in modern history, and it was unprecedented. And so here are a couple news headlines that were written about this. So we worked with the researcher when the study came out to help prepare her talking points. So the news was, I've kind of boiled it down really quickly here on the slide, but I'll give you a little bit more background. So Hectoria Glacier is this tiny glacier on the Antarctic Peninsula, but it retreated really rapidly in 2022. It lost almost half of its mass in just 2 months. The researchers looked at satellite data and some seismic data, and they saw that it showed the glacier rests on this really large flat plane of bedrock. And this ice plane that they called it, this topography is what allowed it to retreat really quickly after these ocean waves came in and broke up the sea ice that were holding it in place. So the impact is that Hectoria Glacier is small, but it's kind of a harbinger of what's to come. And understanding what happened here could help us understand what would happen to retreat on larger glaciers that could really impact global sea levels. The context is that in the past, like thousands of years ago, Antarctic glaciers with ice plains have retreated really quickly, but so this retreat isn't unique in that respect, but it was the fastest in modern history. And so with climate change making these retreats more likely, we need to keep an eye on what's going on. The human dimension is we have to get serious about planning for glacier loss and sea level rise to minimize the impact on vulnerable communities and vulnerable people who live near the coasts. But we need to worry and think about how to adapt. So the talking points, we structured them what we know. This is kind of what I just discussed, so I won't repeat it, but we know that Antarctic glaciers are melting and speeding up. This particular glacier retreated really rapidly, and this was the fastest in modern history, so we wanted to understand why. The satellite data, what's new is the satellite data shows that there's this large flat ice plain, and this topography helped it retreat really quickly. Why it matters, again, it's small, but if this similar retreat happened on a larger glaciers, it could have really big, bad implications for global sea levels, and we can use what happened here to understand what might happen in the future. And so the take-home message is we really need to understand the topography underlying these large glaciers that are thawing and melting and retreating. We need to get serious about planning for glacier loss and sea level rise. So there was actually a little bit of controversy in this example. There was another glaciologist, one particular person, who really disagreed with this study's findings about the ice plain topography and about where the glacier's original grounding zone was located. And he was very vocal about this and almost attacking our CIRES scientist and her paper's results. But so I worked with her to kind of prepare for interviews. Reporters were coming back and saying, hey, there's this controversy. Someone is, arguing about where this grounding zone was. What she reinforced was that something I didn't mention earlier is that there were some seismic data showed some earthquakes that were happening as the glacier retreated. The fact that the earthquakes were happening were proving that the glacier was grounded, because you couldn't have the earthquakes if the ice wasn't touching the ground. So it actually proves that, and the ice plain topography actually does explain this earlier research that this other researcher had done, his findings. So she just kind of reinforced her main points and said, hey, this is, she stood by her work and her study and her conclusions. So don't be afraid to do that. You're the expert, it's your work. All right, so during the interview, it can get a little overwhelming. First, a couple definitions. First, anything you say, okay, what is on the record? Sorry, I'm getting a little confused. On the record means that anything you say can be published and attributed to you by your name or a job title that could identify you. So, most of us, our job titles can't identify us, but if you were the White House press secretary or the CEO of a company, that would work. That could identify you. Off the record means nothing you say can be published. It's just for the reporter's information. It can't be attributed to you in any way. On background is kind of this other third area where your words can be published but not attributed to you by name or job title. And so any conversation by default that you have with a journalist is on the record. If you want to go off the record, you and the journalist have to explicitly agree to that beforehand. You can't go back and say, oh, that was off the record. You have to explicitly say this is conversations off the record ahead of time. So I really recommend staying on the record. I recommend not going off the record or on background, but you can in certain situations. I don't mean this to scare you in any way. Just keep in mind that anything you say from the moment you pick up the phone, from the first email you get from them, anything is on the record. They can use it and publish it. So a couple tips for success, speak in complete sentences. Thanks, Madison, for that time check. Speak slowly and enunciate, take your time. Smile and gesture when you speak, even if you're just on a radio, that really comes through. Be conversational, be yourself. If you mess up, that's okay. Just forgive yourself and move on. Try to avoid negative statements about other researchers and their work. Use transition statements if the conversation gets off topic. You can recommend outside experts if you are, not sure of an answer, or if the reporter wants someone else to talk to, and you don't have to answer every question. So if you don't know the answer to the question, you can refer the reporter to your communications team, to the university spokesperson, or to another expert in your field. You could try to find out and get back to them. You just want to avoid saying no comment, because that implies that you're hiding something. Instead, say, maybe that's outside my area of expertise, outside the scope of my work, or that's a question better posed to a policymaker or an emergency manager or something like that. Totally fine. If the conversation goes off topic or it goes down a road you're not comfortable with, just pivot or transition back to your main messages. So you could say, I see where you're going, but what's important to remember is this, or I can't speculate on that, but what I can tell you is, and then go back to your main points. Or that's outside the scope of my work. Or you can say, what I find exciting is this. The reporter really wants to know what you find exciting, what you think about this. You're the expert. So just kind of pivot and transition back to what you know. So again, just some do's and don'ts. Practice summarizing your work, repeat your key messages over and over again. Try to get some good sound bites. Don't worry, don't beat yourself up if you mess up, that's okay. And just remember, you're the expert. It's your work. Try not to be rude or aggressive or sarcastic or disparage other scientists or their work. Again, don't speak on behalf of your university or institution, or try not to say anything that would damage your institution's reputation. So afterwards, the story is going to continue. The reporter will often follow up. They'll fact check with you. So you could build a relationship with them if you want. If they cover your work a lot or this topic a lot, you can invite them on a tour of your lab or in the field with you, but talk to your comms team first. They'll help you set it up, and they just want to make sure they know what's going on. A couple things to keep in mind. You can't review a story in its entirety before it's published. This just means that's just because we have a free press, and sending a source a story before it's published could be seen as introducing bias. So reporters, in order to keep their stories objective, they don't usually share the whole thing with you ahead of time. They might share snippets and quotes and fact checks and facts to check, but you often can't see the whole thing. There's also no acknowledgement section. So that means, they're not going to say the name of everybody who is involved. They're not going to say who did what. That's okay. It's just normal standard practice. Mistakes do happen. If you see a mistake in a news story, you can let them know about it, bring it to their attention, but just accept that, that does happen sometimes. And sometimes journalists kind of, get a little artistic and fun and creative with it. And sometimes you have to just accept that if they didn't say something exactly the way you would have said it. And remember that news stories have really strict length limits. They're not going to be able to include every aspect of your study or everything that you said to them. So they have to cut it off at some point. So just accept that not everything's going to make it in there. And again, how to help journalists get it right? Do everything I just talked about. Work with your comms office, prepare your messages, be clear, practice summarizing your work. Be an on-call expert so that you can help them when there's something when you can, give them expertise and background when something happens in the news. Build relationships with them. That's really great. Use everything I've already given you here, and try to incorporate that when you're writing your paper or a meeting abstract. All right, so I know I've thrown so much at you guys right now. So now we're gonna kind of just take a step back, and we're gonna try to have some fun. We're gonna do a headline activity where you're gonna have a turn to summarize some science and write some headlines. So what is a headline? A headline is just a declarative statement that summarizes the research results. Sometimes you can get the implications in there if you're a good writer, or if it's short. Not always, and that's totally okay. A good headline is clear, it's specific and concise, and it's a little clever because you gotta, make it a little interesting. But we try to avoid the super clickbaity headlines. But it should be clear and specific and concise. So here are some examples here of science headlines. And something to keep in mind is a headline is the answer. It's not a question. Very often when you're writing a paper, you phrase the title of the paper as a question, or you'll talk about the topic that you're addressing. The headline is the answer to the question. There's no ambiguity. The reason is that if you phrase a headline as a question or even a paper title, someone could interpret that as, hey, the science isn't settled yet, if there's a question mark. So if you have a result and the question is answered, say that. Say the answer to the question, not the question itself. This could be really important with climate change too. If people are saying, oh, well, the science isn't settled, well, if it is settled, make sure that's clear. And here's some examples where the paper title was a question and then the headline turned that into the actual answer. So what does the headline do? It captures the research results, maybe explains what's new or unusual or surprising, and again, maybe it leads to a reaction: awe, amusement, anxiety, or anger. So now I'm going to give you guys a chance. So I have a couple different examples. I have some summaries of research that are really short and quick. And I want you all to kind of come up with some headlines for them. Just try to capture the research results, be clear and concise and clever. Normally I would say stick to being clear and concise, but this is an exercise, so let's just have fun with it. Totally just have fun, use your own creativity, just write it as a statement. That's all. That's my main advice to you. Write it as a statement, not a question. Again, ignore the poll EV link. We're just gonna put them in the chat. So I know this may sound a little overwhelming or intimidating to you guys, but I promise I think you're gonna find it fun. So here is the first one. Here's a title and then a short summary. So whenever you're ready, throw a couple potential headlines in the chat. And then I'll show you some actual headlines that were written about this work. Yes, Kaya, great. Explosive events from the young sun lead to rise in habitability on Earth. Yes, life in the beginning provides insight to life on other planets. These are great. Early life began to thrive because of solar explosions. Love it. Young sun explosions catalyzed our habitable planet. Yes, I love these. These are awesome. Yes, love this. Sun explosions give habitable environment to Earth and Mars. The sun, explosions from the sun kicked off life on Earth. Love this. These are all great. You can keep going, but now I'm going to show you guys some actual headlines that were written about this study. All of your headlines would be perfect. So great job. Let's see if we have time for one or two more. I have a couple in here, but we don't have to get through them all. All right, number two. This is maybe my favorite study of the past 10 years. How Uranus fell over. Yes, massive impact. Turn Uranus on its side. Yeah, computer models reveal the cause of Uranus's unusual tilt. Yes, these are great. A big impact that tripped over Uranus. When things go sideways, how Uranus became tilted. Awesome. We can keep going, but I'll show you some actual headlines now. And I know I didn't give you guys all of the information here, so don't feel bad that, you know, you don't know that. Like the thing with like the object was twice the size of Earth. Don't worry about that. So I have a few more examples. Do you guys want to do one more or do you just want to go to questions? I will leave it up to you all. One more? All right, let's do one more. All right. This one might be a little challenging. So it's about tornado formation. Oh yeah, rethinking tornado formation from the ground up. Yes, love this. Tornadoes form from the ground up, not the top down. Recent study finds. Yes, what we know about tornado formation is probably wrong. Yes, gets right to the point. Tornadoes start from the bottom. Yep. Ooh, yeah, this is great. I love it. You guys are having so much fun. Fast and Furious. How the creation of tornadoes are being explored with mobile radar stations. All right, we can keep going, but I'm going to show you guys some actual headlines now. There you go. All right. Well, I will skip my next two, but uh, if Madison and Mariama share the slides with you all, you can feel free to do them on your own. So, all right, that was pretty much everything I wanted to share with you all. I know I threw so much at you. Here's just some resources. These are all publicly available. At CIRES, we have this website called CIRES Connect, where we have tons of resources. We have worksheets for helping you prepare your message, kind of summarizes everything I've gone over here. AAAS is a great communication toolkit. Go to your own university communicators. They're always here to help you. The Measure of Things is a great social math calculator. And then there's this new tool that I just discovered called Science in Public that helps you hone your message. It's kind of an AI chatbot. It helps you eliminate jargon, helps you hone your science message. Super helpful. I really recommend checking it out. And so with that, I think we have time for a question or two. Um, it's been really fun seeing you, working with you guys and seeing all the fun headlines you wrote. So if anyone has a question, yeah. Yeah, so Jocelyn says, as science writers, how do we balance writing punchy and definitive paper titles that make our science more newsy with the actual contents? It's really a balance and it's hard. I would say, I'm always on the side of being as clear as possible and less punchy, but try to incorporate as a start, just incorporate some new keywords or just show, in your title, like what's unusual, surprising, new or weird. You can use those words. It is totally acceptable. Hazel, go ahead.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for the presentation today. This was great. I guess I'm curious about some of the topics that folks had put in at the beginning, like things that they were worried about, or I guess really just like the overlap of the sort of political side and science, both with like not wanting to lie or not wanting to like obscure that like politics does have an impact on science or that there is an overlap there. But also, yeah, just wondering how you approach that.
Yeah.
And maybe another question is I've heard concerns or felt like reporters maybe have an angle that they're like the high politic like sells more. And so like that they're kind of trying to goad you into taking a stance that's maybe outside of your purview. So both of those, like wanting, yeah, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So let me see if I can remember everything. It can be really difficult to stay on message if a reporter is really trying to get you to go somewhere that you're uncomfortable with. So that's why practicing is really important so that you get really comfortable sticking to your guns and sticking to what you know and not speculating. And you can keep repeating yourself, say, hey, I don't want to speculate, or I don't feel comfortable. You can say, I don't feel that, this is kind of outside the scope of what I do, but say, hey, that's a better question for a policymaker. It's a better question for this other expert. You have to just really stick to your guns, and it's hard. It takes practice. I worked with a scientist a few years ago who was studying endocrine disrupting chemicals in oysters, and they found, evidence of these chemicals in oysters on the Pacific coast. And the reporter was at a local outlet and they were really like, well, is it safe to eat these oysters? And the reporter just kind of wouldn't let it go. And they were like, and so again, she kept being like, hey, I'm not a public health expert. All I can say is that this is what we found. Really just stick to your results. This is what we found. And that is a better question for the public health department. So always just kind of transition back to what you know. And always your level, your own level of comfort, stick to that. If you are more comfortable talking about the political aspect, you can do it. But if you're not, stick to your own level of comfort and just really practice staying that like role play again and again. Have your communications team throw these questions ahead of you at you sometime, like do a practice session. Just get used to it. And that will really, really help you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lauren. And thanks everyone for being like really active participants. This has been really fun. We hope that you found the event useful. And there are some upcoming events that you also might find useful that PSECCO is co-hosting with different organizations. You can see those on the screen or on the events page of our website. As always, you can stay up to date with PSECCO things on the PSECCO community Slack. I see Lauren also posted a link to her email in the chat if you have additional questions. I just wanted to note that this event was recorded, and so that recording will be available on the PSECCO events page as well, along with the PowerPoint slides, as Lauren mentioned. So you can maybe practice some more headline making. In our follow-up email, which we'll send next week, we'll include the link to the slides and the recording and whatnot. And we'll also include a survey, which we'd really appreciate getting your input via. And Madison's also posted that in the chat. Thanks so much again, and we hope to see you at some upcoming events. Thanks also again to Lauren for putting together such a fun media training. Have a good day, y'all. Bye.